Welcome back to Horror Galaxy. Tonight, I have 5 small-town horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Horror Galaxy, you don't walk alone. I was already halfway past the snowbank when the bell rang behind me. A single sharp clang that stopped my foot mid-step and made my stomach drop like I'd missed a stair. I turned around, heart pounding. Staring back at the elementary school I knew for a fact had been closed since before I was born. The sound hadn't come from town. It hadn't come from any house. It came from the building itself, the same building I'd been warned never to go near after dark. I stood there listening, my breath loud in my ears, telling myself it had to be something else. A truck, metal shifting, anything. But I knew that sound. Everyone in Fort Kent did. That bell used to mean recess was over. It used to mean line up. It used to mean kids went missing during the blizzard years before. The ones adults spoke about only when they thought children weren't listening. I told myself to keep walking. My boots didn't move. The tutoring session had run late again, and my parents hated that route home. Hated how I cut past the old school instead of taking the long way around. I'd argued it saved time. Standing there, staring at the dark windows, I wished I'd listened. The bell rang again, slower this time, like someone pulling the rope by hand. "Don't," I whispered out loud to myself. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't there when I'd walked past the first time. I knew because I always checked the ground. Liked stepping in older tracks to pack the snow. These were fresh, pressed deep, small boots like mine, leading from the road straight to the front doors. Too many of them. Too neat. All pointing the same way. My chest felt tight. I remember thinking about my mom's face if I didn't come home. About how she counted minutes. I also remember the other thing, the thought I hated admitting even now. If those kids had vanished here, maybe they hadn't vanished at all. Maybe they'd just gone inside. I followed the footprints. Every step closer made my skin prickle, like I was doing something wrong but necessary. The front doors were chained shut, rusted links looped through the handles. I stopped so close I could see my breath fog the glass. The footprints didn't stop at the door. They went right up to it and then kept going, as if the door hadn't been there. The bell rang again, directly above me. "Hello?" My voice shook. I hated how small it sounded. The chain rattled once, sharp and sudden, and then went still. I jumped back, nearly slipping. Nothing moved after that. No footsteps. No wind. Just the quiet weight of the building pressing down on me. I should have run. Instead, I pressed my face to the glass. Inside, the hallway lights were on. Not bright. Not welcoming. Just enough to see the tiled floor, scuffed and marked with little black lines I recognized instantly. Shoe marks from kids lining up. The bell rang again, closer now, and I realized it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from inside, from down the hall. A shape moved past the doorway. Small. Too fast. "I'm not supposed to be here," I said, like that mattered. The side door was open. I don't remember deciding to go in. I remember being inside, the door closing softly behind me, the smell hitting me all at once. Old paper. Dust. Something cold and wet underneath it all. The lights hummed overhead. My footprints joined the others on the floor, perfectly matched. The bell rang again, and this time I flinched hard enough my ears rang. Down the hallway, classroom doors stood open. Coats hung on hooks. Boots lined the wall, all in pairs. All small. All dry. I walked past them slowly, my fingers brushing the wall to steady myself. "Line up," a voice said. It came from the last classroom. A woman's voice, tired, firm, familiar in a way that made my throat ache. I knew that voice. Everyone did. She'd been the teacher on duty the day the blizzard hit. The one who stayed late with the kids, who missed their buses. I stepped into the room. Desks were filled. Children sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. Their faces were pale, blue at the edges, like they'd been cold a long time. Snow dusted their shoulders but never fell. At the front of the room stood the teacher, chalk in hand, her back to me. On the board was written today's date. Not 1980. Today. "You're late," she said without turning. "I walk home," I managed. I heard the bell. She turned then. Her eyes were wrong, not empty. Just focused somewhere far past me. "We rang it every night," she said. No one came. The kids' heads turned in unison. I felt something pull at me, not physically, but deep inside, like the moment before you give in to crying. "You can go," she said gently. "You're not on the list." "What list?" I asked. She pointed to the attendance sheet on her desk. Names filled every line, written neatly, the last one added in fresh ink. "My name." "No," I said. "I have to go home." She looked tired. So did they. The bell rang one final time, and the lights flickered. I grabbed the paper, ripped it in half, and ran. The room screamed then, not loud, not sharp, but full, like every breath those kids never got back. I slammed through the side door and didn't stop running until my house lights filled my vision. The school closed again the next day, permanently this time. The bell tower was removed, the chains replaced. They never found the attendance sheet. Years later, when my own child came home late from tutoring, I walked them myself. I never heard the bell again. I was standing in the trench with my gloves already soaked through when I realized the meter shouldn't have been spinning at all. I remember squinting at it, brushing dirt away with my thumb, thinking maybe I'd misread the address. I checked the clipboard again. Same house, same number. 0 recorded water usage for 23 years. Yet the meter hummed softly, steady and alive, like it always had. I straightened up and looked at the house. Curtains drawn. No car. No lights. The place had been vacant since the late 60s, according to the town records. I'd read that file twice that morning because it bothered me. You don't just stop using water and keep a house standing. Pipes freeze. Lines burst. Nothing about this made sense. I climbed out of the trench and knocked anyway. Habit. No answer. I turned the outside tap and water flowed immediately, clear and cold. My stomach tightened. I shut it off and listened. The pipes inside the wall's side, settling like they'd been disturbed mid-conversation. I radioed in and asked if the address had been flagged wrong. Dispatch told me, no, voice flat. Distracted. I could hear paper shuffling. That line feeds the old sector, she said. If it's running, log it and move on. I didn't move on. Every house on that stretch showed the same thing. No usage on paper. Normal flow in reality. Some had been empty longer than I'd been alive. Others had burned, collapsed, or been torn down. The meters didn't care. They turned anyway. By mid-afternoon, my hands were shaking. I kept imagining the pipes like veins, pulsing quietly under the town, carrying something that wasn't just water. I decided to open the underground vault at the end of the block, the one that fed the entire row. It wasn't on my route, but I told myself it was preventative maintenance. The vault lid fought me. Rusted hinges screamed as I pried it open. The smell hit first. Damp, metallic, old. I climbed down the ladder slowly, boots clanging, my breath loud in my ears. The main line ran through the center, thick and dark, branching off like ribs. Something was wedged against the pipe. At first I thought it was debris, a rag. I reached out and froze when my fingers brushed fabric. Denim. A pant leg, flattened and pale, pressed into the metal as if it had grown there. I pulled back hard, heart racing, and shone my light closer. It wasn't a pant leg. It was a sleeve, still wrapped around a forearm. The skin looked preserved, stretched thin, fused seamlessly into the pipe wall. No blood, no tear, just sealed like it had always belonged there. I stumbled back, nearly falling. My radio crackled, startling me so badly I shouted. Dispatch asked for a status update. I couldn't answer. My mouth felt glued shut. I moved the light again. There were more. A child's shoe embedded near a joint. A wedding ring half swallowed by a valve. A set of keys trapped beneath mineral buildup. The plastic fob still legible. Names I recognized. I retched, barely missing the ladder. I forced myself to breathe, to think. These weren't remains dumped here. They were incorporated. The pipes weren't carrying water. They were storing people. Or pieces of them. Slowly, over decades, the radio crackled again, this time a different voice. Lower. Familiar. You shouldn't have opened that. Who is this? I asked, my voice breaking. You know, it said. We all do. I realized then that every disappearance in Kuskesing followed the same pattern. Quiet move-outs. No struggle. Just people fading from records while their houses stayed warm, taps ready, pipes full. The voice explained it calmly. The water had to come from somewhere. The town needed it. When the river froze or dropped too low, the system compensated, took what it needed. The meters were never missing. They were full. I climbed out of the vault and sealed it shut. Logged a fault I knew would be ignored. That night, I went home and turned on every tap, listened. The water flowed like always. I resigned the next morning, left town by the end of the week. Years later, I still don't drink tap water. And sometimes, when I shower, I swear I hear something shift behind the walls, adjusting, making room. I was buttoning my coat when Mrs. Fraser pressed the ledger into my hands and told me not to lose it. Her voice was brisk, like this was nothing more than a shopping list. But her fingers lingered on the cover an extra second before letting go. I laughed and promised I wouldn't, because that was what I always did when something felt heavier than it should. Babysitting for the traveling farm families meant long evenings alone in unfamiliar houses, meant learning children's routines quickly and leaving before dawn when the parents returned. The ledger was how I kept track. Names, dates, hours, simple. I tucked it under my arm and waved as Mrs. Fraser's truck disappeared down the lane. Inside, the house settled around me. 2 children, both asleep. I checked them, kissed foreheads that smelled like soap, and went to the kitchen table to write their names down. I flipped the ledger open and froze. Several entries above today's date weren't in my handwriting. The names were written neatly, carefully, the way someone copies from memory. Beside each name was the same note. Did not return. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. I told myself I must have borrowed an old book, that another sitter had used it before me. But I knew every ledger I'd owned. I bought them myself, identical brown covers, first page always blank except for my name. This one had my name written there, my handwriting, dated 3 years earlier. I turned the pages slowly. Some names I recognized. Children I'd watched once or twice, families who'd moved on. Others meant nothing to me at all. Ages were listed. 6, 8, 4. Locations scribbled in the margins. Farms I'd never visited. Houses I didn't know. I shut the book hard and listened. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. I stood up, walked the hall, checked the bedrooms again. Both children slept peacefully, breathing steady, present. Back at the table, I opened the ledger again, forcing myself to read every line. The dates stretched back years. Always the same note at the end. Did not return. No explanations. No crossings out. I remembered other nights then, details that suddenly felt wrong. Children asking if I could see someone standing outside. Kids insisting there was an extra place set at the table. Doors I didn't remember unlocking found ajar by morning. I had laughed those things off, written them off as imagination. Now they rearranged themselves into something deliberate. I thought of asking Mrs. Fraser when she came back. The idea of waiting hours with this knowledge made my chest ache. I tried to distract myself, cleaned, folded laundry, checked the clock too often. Each time I passed the table, the ledger seemed closer to the edge, like it wanted to fall. Near midnight, there was a knock at the door. It was light, polite. I didn't move. Another knock followed, then a voice, a child's voice. "Miss," it said softly. "I'm cold." My heart started racing. The children I was watching were asleep. I knew that. I just checked. I walked to the door anyway, every step stiff and wrong. Through the glass, I saw a small figure standing on the step, head down, hair plastered to their face. "What's your name?" I asked through the door. There was a pause. "Then, you wrote it down." I opened the ledger with shaking hands and flipped pages blindly until one name seemed to leap out at me. I said it aloud. The figure nodded. "I don't know you," I whispered. "You will," the child said. "You always do." I didn't open the door. I backed away. The ledger clutched to my chest, and the knocking stopped. Silence rushed in. After a long moment, I heard footsteps retreating, slow and careful. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table, ledger open, watching the names. I tried tearing a page out. The paper resisted, stretching instead of ripping, then snapping back smooth and whole. I tried crossing a name out. The ink soaked in and vanished, leaving the letters darker than before. I tried hiding the ledger under cushions, in cupboards, even outside the house. Each time, it returned to the table, open to the current page, patient. The house felt aware of it. Doors creaked only when I passed the table. The clock ticked louder there. Just before dawn, a new entry appeared. Ink darkened on the page, letters forming as if written by an invisible hand. The name matched one of the children asleep down the hall. Beside it, the familiar note. Did not return. I ran to the bedroom, heart in my throat. The bed was empty, sheets cold, no sign of struggle. No sound. The window was still latched. The other child slept on, oblivious, their small hand curled under their chin. When the parents returned, panic twisted their faces as I tried to explain. We searched everywhere. Fields, sheds, roads. No trace. The police asked questions I couldn't answer. About doors, about visitors, about why the ledger listed their child's name already, written in my hand. They never accused me outright, but I felt it hanging there, unspoken. I was followed home by their stares, by the weight of suspicion. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw ink forming letters. Heard polite knocking. I quit babysitting that week. Packed my things. Tried to forget. But I kept the ledger. I couldn't bring myself to burn it. The pages felt warm when I touched them, like they were alive. Sometimes I thought I felt a pulse. For a long time, I tried to convince myself I was imagining patterns that were not really there. I told myself grief did strange things to memory. That fear filled in gaps with meaning. I took other work. I moved houses. I stopped answering calls from farms that asked if I was available. Still, every so often, I would wake in the night with the certainty that a name had been added somewhere, written carefully, waiting for me to notice. Years passed. Children went missing across the countryside, always from families that traveled, always briefly watched by someone whose name appeared in the margins of my book. Mine was written beside every entry. I tried giving the ledger away once. It was back on my table the next morning. I finally understood. The ledger wasn't a record. It was consent, a witness. It needed someone to acknowledge the children before they were taken, to make them real enough to be removed without noise. I gave the ledger to the police after the last entry appeared. They told me it was evidence. They locked it away. I watched the door close behind it and felt both lighter and unbearably empty, like I had abandoned something that knew my name. No more names have been added since. The silence around it feels deliberate, like a held breath. Sometimes I think about the ones still unwritten, about the children who might have passed briefly through my care if I had kept going, and I am grateful, in a quiet and complicated way, that I stopped opening the book, even though part of me still wonders what would happen if I did, and whether the knocking would start again, just as polite. I hope never. I truly hope it stays silent forever. Please, God. I was still swinging my legs under the seat when the bus rolled past the last stop, and at first I thought the driver had just forgotten, because that happened sometimes when he was tired. I remember looking out the window for my cousin's fence, the one with the crooked post, and feeling that small jolt of confusion when it didn't appear. The engine kept humming. The road didn't curve back toward town. It kept going straight into dirt. Say, or. A girl near the front called out, her voice thin. You missed it. The driver didn't turn his head. Everyone's already off, he said calmly. That made a few kids laugh. The nervous kind of laugh you do when an adult says something that doesn't fit reality. I laughed too, at first. Then the bus hit a bump, and my laughter stopped. The paved road was gone. Dust crept in through the open window seam, dry and bitter on my tongue. I stood up and looked down the aisle. There were still kids on the bus. I counted quickly, the way children do when they're scared and want proof. I knew most of them by name. We rode together every day from the farms outside San Martin. Same seats. Same order getting off. Today, there were fewer. The bus slowed at the next bend, and one boy near the middle rang the bell cord. It chimed once, sharp and final. The bus stopped. He didn't look scared when he stood up. That's what bothered me later. He looked relieved, like he was glad to be done. He walked past me without making eye contact and stepped down into the dust. The doors folded shut behind him. The bus moved again. I leaned across the aisle. Was that his stop? I whispered to the girl beside me. She shook her head slowly. Gets off after me. My chest felt tight. I pressed my forehead to the glass. The road outside was narrow now, trees crowding in close enough that branches brushed the side of the bus with a soft, dragging sound. I tried to memorize landmarks, but everything looked the same, like the scenery was repeating itself. Another bell rang. This time, a pair of siblings stood up together. They didn't speak. They didn't even look at each other. The driver stopped without being asked, and they stepped down into the trees, swallowed almost immediately by the green. When the bus pulled away, the aisle felt longer. I walked to the front, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might throw up. My stop was back there, I said. My voice cracked, and I hated that it sounded like I was about to cry. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. His eyes were kind, almost sad. You already got off, he said gently. No? I insisted. I'm still here. He smiled like I'd told a joke. You'll see. I went back to my seat, shaking. The girl beside me was gone. I hadn't noticed her stand. I stared at the empty vinyl, still warm, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I wrapped my arms around myself and watched the bell cord like it might bite. By the time the bus stopped again, there were only a handful of us left. No one spoke. The engine idled softly each time, patient. Every stop felt final, like a decision being made without us. When my turn came, I didn't pull the cord. The bus stopped anyway. I stayed seated, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I'm not getting off, I said, louder than I meant to. That's all right, the driver replied. You already did. The doors opened. The air outside felt heavier, pressing in on me. I could see a faint path leading away from the road, worn down by small feet. Names flickered through my mind. Kids who'd moved away. Kids people said had gone to live with relatives. I realized with a sick certainty that this was where they'd gone. I want to go home, I said. The driver turned fully then. Up close, his face looked older than I remembered, lined in a way I'd never noticed. This is home, he said. It just takes a while to remember. Something in me snapped. I bolted for the back door, shoved it open, and jumped. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting up my leg, but I ran anyway, crashing through brush, ignoring the scratches, the burning in my lungs. I didn't look back. I don't know how long I ran. Eventually, the trees thinned, and I stumbled onto a familiar trail, then a road I recognized. When I reached town, adults stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. I'd been missing for 3 hours, they said. The bus had returned empty. I never rode it again. The route changed the next year. New driver, new bus. Sometimes, when I visit, I hear an engine on the dirt road and count, without meaning to, wondering who didn't get back on. I was scrubbing a patch of floor beside the boiler when I realized the chalk hadn't been there the night before. And that stopped me mid-stroke with my mop dripping dirty water onto my boots. The furnace room was my responsibility. And I knew every crack and stain down there, because I was the only one who ever bothered with it. The white lines curved and intersected deliberately, not like careless marks from students, but measured, intentional. I crouched and wiped at one line with my thumb. It didn't smear. It stayed bright, like it had been drawn minutes ago. I straightened slowly, listening. The pipes hummed the way they always did, steady and deep. But something about the sound felt closer, like the walls were listening back. I fetched a flashlight and followed the chalk. It spread across the floor in branching paths, looping around the boiler base, running beneath the old workbench. The shape it formed made my stomach tighten. It looked like a map. Corridors, rooms, dead ends. None of it matched the blueprints I'd studied 100 times when I started the job. I told myself kids must have snuck down here. Still, the door was locked, and no one else had keys. I erased a section with the mop, hard enough that my arm ached. When I stepped back, the chalk was still there, unbroken. I left it overnight, deciding I'd deal with it in the morning with a supervisor. When I came back the next evening, the map had grown. New lines extended toward the far wall, ending exactly where a supply closet sat upstairs. I felt cold then, a deep, internal cold that had nothing to do with temperature. I climbed the stairs and opened the closet. It was smaller than I remembered. The back wall looked thicker, the shelf bolted oddly high. I pressed my ear to it and heard a faint vibration, like distant machinery. Downstairs, I added my own chalk, marking where the closet should be on the map. My line vanished as soon as I stepped back, replaced by a corrected version, shifted slightly to the left. That's when I started losing sleep. Each night, the map refined itself. Measurements tightened. Rooms gained labels. Written in cramped block letters I didn't recognize. I stopped erasing them. I started copying them into a notebook, afraid I'd forget. The names didn't mean anything at first, just numbers and short words. Storage, intake, hold. The last word bothered me. I checked student records out of curiosity, then fear. Names from decades ago. Kids who'd transferred, supposedly. Kids who'd dropped out. One last name matched a label on the map. I stared at it until my eyes burned. The next evening, I followed the chalk to a spot beneath the gymnasium. The map showed a room there, large, central. No access marked. I paced the floor above, counting steps, lining up doors. When I tapped the tiles, one section sounded hollow. I brought tools. I told myself I was fixing a loose tile. The concrete beneath cracked easier than it should have, and when the hole opened, warm air rushed out, smelling of metal and dust and something old. A ladder descended into darkness. I stood there a long time, shaking before climbing down. The space below was narrow, unfinished, but clean, like it was still in use. Pipes ran along the ceiling, branching exactly as the map showed. I followed them, heart pounding, my flashlight beam trembling. Doors lined the corridor, metal and unmarked. Behind the first, I found desks stacked neatly, identical to the ones upstairs, outdated models I'd only seen in storage photos. The second room was empty except for chalkboards leaned against the wall. Names were written on them, erased down to ghosts. I recognized a few now. The last door stuck. I pushed until it gave, and the light fell on rows of chairs bolted to the floor, all facing a blank wall. The floor beneath them was worn smooth, as if feet had shuffled there for years. I understood then. The school hadn't expanded upward, it had grown downward. When classrooms filled, they made more. When records got messy, they sealed sections off. No one noticed because the building kept functioning. Heat flowed. Lights stayed on. The map wasn't planning. It was remembering. I went to the administration the next day. They listened politely, then told me the school had no sublevels. They suggested I take leave. When I returned to the furnace room that night, the chalk map ended abruptly. Lines stopped. Rooms closed in on themselves. One final label appeared near the boiler, written larger than the rest. Caretaker. I quit the next morning. Weeks later, the school began renovations. They found nothing, they said. Filled in the hole. Updated the blueprints. Sometimes, when I walk past, I feel heat under my feet in places it shouldn't be. And I know the map is still down there. Complete at last. Waiting for someone else to notice it.